Program is hosted by the Global Village Museum of Arts and Cultures in Fort Collins, Colorado. We have actually people joining us from around the world, including India, Japan, Ireland, and Brazil. So thank you to our international registrants. We also have Bonnie Titley here, who is a member of our board, and Barbara Schoenberger, who is the director of the museum. Amy Pepper, who is Dr. Belk's daughter, is here. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. Russell Belk is a distinguished research professor and Crafts Food Canada Chair and Marketing at York University in Toronto. He is the author of more than 800 books and journals, as well as the recipient of numerous awards. He is a leader in his field of marketing and one of the founders of Consumer Culture Theory, and he is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Belk. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And welcome to everyone. I'm glad that you're all here. And I think the way that I'll do this is, spend about the first half talking about traditional collecting as we see in the museum exhibition. And then the last half, I want to talk about what does digitization do to collecting. And so as I do this, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and I'll turn to those at the end of our discussion. And so feel free to put those in at any time. Also, if I mention something that you want to get a hold of, as you might with the very next slide that I'll show, email me. I'll put my email at the end, or just raise it in the chat, and I'll respond to it at the end. So something very fortuitous happened yesterday. I got an essay from a woman in Colorado. Sorry, not in Colorado. You're in Colorado. She's in Missouri, Jeanette Cooperman. And she had written an essay in, I believe it's called Common Times, called Our Obsession with the Passion of Possessions. And this was the illustration that let it out. And this was an AI rendition of the collector. And I don't think this is a very accurate, because I've interviewed a number of collectors, very accurate portrayal of the collectors. It's perhaps a stereotype. You can see an older man in old-fashioned disheveled clothes, scruffy beard, balding. He's looking up with a sort of pensive, worried look if you look at his eyebrow furrows. And I would guess that he's looking at a clock or a calendar, perhaps wondering if all of these magical, wonderful things that he has collected are going to do other people good. What's going to happen to his collection as he reaches the end of his life? At any rate, I thought it was a great illustration and a counter illustration of the collector to begin with. So to get into the talk, I'll start with a quote actually from Mrs. Cooperman. And what she said was, I want a passionate, consuming, ever-present, interesting, sorry, I've got to move so I could see the rest of my slide here. Oh, here we go, sorry. Okay, I want a passionate, consuming, ever-present interest, constant as breath, a quest strong enough to soak up any extra cash or time without regret, a chase so exciting I will want to show all the world I find. I want to collect something. So that starts us off with the passion that we're talking about, and I'm going to throw in a few other quotes from Ms. Cooperman as we go along. So to do that, this is an illustration from what might be thought of as the golden age of collecting. This was 17th century Europe, when Europe had discovered the New World, not that there was no one there, but they found all sorts of treasures here. Now, collecting is actually a prehistoric phenomenon. We can find evidence in Cro-Magnon times of collections of interesting pebbles and iron pyrites and so forth. And it was led into this period in the 18th century, 1700s, where they collected and they begin to get some discipline to it. You can see that this is a collection of sea animals, including crocodile on the ceiling. And also, if we jump ahead a little bit farther, Robert Louis Stevenson in 1905 had a short child's poem. The world is so full of a number of things, I'm sure we should all be as happy as kings. And that's really what collectors celebrate, is the world. And it's been estimated in a number of studies that 1 out of every 3 people collect. And I think that's an underestimate. If you count the songs and the books and the photographs on your smartphone, it's really much more than that. But during the time of the New World, we had these things like the picture on the right called Wunderkammern, or wonder rooms, or wonder cabinets. And people were, as you can see from the discipline of this collection, learning to be good collectors. And so we're not seeing any man-made objects here other than the bookcases. We're seeing a collection of natural phenomena from the sea. And out of this, but actually starting much earlier, museums grew as well. And collecting even then could be a cutthroat. Hopefully it's not still so much, but a cutthroat pastime. And so the Emperor Nero sent to Petronius well, he was a rich man in the Senate of Rome, and he had a collection of Mirren bowls, and Nero also collected them and wanted Petronius's collection, which he wouldn't give to him or sell to him. And so Nero sent him poison in his best marine bowl, and Petronius drank it and then threw the bowl on the ground, smashing it. And something very similar happened when Mark Antony sent Verus, who had a collection of Corinthian bronzes, which he'd actually acquired illegally. And again, Verus drank the poison and threw the bowl on the ground. I guess he had learned from Petronius. So these were some early depictions of natural phenomena. It was also important to collect art, and these were shown in Kunstkammer, that is, art cabinets, art museums, the forerunners of art museums, art rooms. And this was a way to show off. And in these paintings, they're all about people. These may be scenes from the Bible, but busts and sculptures, as well as paintings, occupy this room. They're the dominant theme. Another quote from Cooperman, she says, "What matters to real collectors, it seems, are objects. Objet, the French word meaning not just an inert lump of stuff, but something so adored it elicits passion simply by existing." And I think we, and I would probably count myself among them, at least in terms of childhood collections of rocks and minerals, can feel that passion today. And those of you who have collections on exhibit in the museum will certainly feel that thrill as you go through and look at your collection and the others beside it. Now, there have been 2 shifts in collections or collecting lately. One is material versus digital collectibles, going from tangible to intangible, offline to online, and what I'm calling a money aristocracy to a time aristocracy. Now, if you're young, you have an abundance of time. You don't have a 9-to-5 job to get to. So you have time to spend on collecting. On the other hand, as you get older, you have less time, but more money. And so the ability to get into collecting, since many collections are purchased, at least in part, rather than spending the time investing in the collection. And the second trend is from aesthetic and scientific to financial motives, financial investments, if you will, and appreciating objects for that reason, versus the displayed collection. If you have a collection that is simply for investment purposes, you can lock it away and keep it in a vault, and it can remain unseen. Unlike what we would hope for a traditional aesthetic or scientific collection. Now, the illustration in the background here shows 2 men, one in the upper left, one on the ground in the front, with the bear mauling him. And this is from a French story, La Peau d'Ours, and or The Skin of the Bear. And it's a story about two men who try to sell to a furrier the skin of a bear, which they have not yet caught or killed. And there's an expression in French, don't sell the skin before you've killed the bear. It's a little bit like our expression, don't count your chickens before they hatch or before they roost. So in 1903, Henri Matisse proposed a Skin of the Bear Club. And the idea was that people would invest their money each year in this club, and he and another gentleman would decide what art to buy with it. And they would do this for a period of 10 years, after which they would sell the collection, hopefully earning a great profit and distributing it among the members who have the purchasing power, the holding power to hold this collection, and the ability to wait it out for that period of time. So that began collecting for financial reasons back in the early 20th century. But as we'll see, it has arrived afresh today with non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and other programs. Now, if we look at ways to do that, this is an example of financially motivated art collecting. This company called Particle collects famous works of art that it thinks are going to appreciate. And it sells them, it breaks it up into 10,000 pieces. It takes a high resolution photograph. It breaks it up into 10,000 pieces and sells them to people who want to invest and keep their money in it until the art appreciates. So this one is a Banksy painting. And as you can see where the blue lines intersect here, that is your parcel that you own. And so it shows you just what you bought, and it's going to appreciate in time, at least is the expectation. Now, I've defined material collections as the process of actively, selectively, and passionately acquiring and possessing things removed from ordinary use, sorry about that, and perceived as part of a set of non-identical objects or experiences. That keeps getting ahead of me here. And so what we're looking at here is a process that defines what is a collection, and they're non-identical objects. We sometimes have a rule, no two alike. And you can see some examples here on the left of both man-made and natural objects. Now, this is different from hoarding or accumulating, which lack the concept of a set and meaning and unity and purpose. Collection must have a perceived unity that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, which all go together. There's also a non-utility. Even functional items like salt and pepper shakers are no longer used for their intended purpose. That should be intended rather than intended. And there's also selectivity. You're not just collecting willy-nilly, but again, training children, especially to be good collectors, says that if you have a collection like these seashells and starfish in the middle, and you throw in a nut and bolt, that doesn't fit. That's not good collecting. And so we're trying to teach them how to order things, how to have this notion of unity. And so we avoid duplication unless you have some spares for trade, perhaps. Now, stamps are something that has traditionally been collected, especially in America. And this is Jerry Jeff Walker. Tore off the stamp for Black Jim. To relieve me. Whoops, took off the last line of that. Billy wrote up to relieve me and smiled at my letter and grinned, getting ahead here. But stamp collecting is an old passion. Some of these American stamps have issues of domestic citizenship, have images of famous people, although the top right image is just called American Indian, unlike the one in the bottom center, which is Chief Joseph, at least he's named, but as a part of the portrait gallery. Others of them, besides famous people, have to do with famous events and mottos like law and order, Bill of Rights, and so forth. So stamp collecting is an old passion. It's a particular type where there's only so many objects to collect, although a great many. And the post office realized early on that many people were buying stamps and not using them for postage, simply collecting them. And so they began to, as many other countries did, produce postage stamps for collection rather than for use. Now, here's some of the objects that are in the collections here from this people's gallery. And so you can see barbed wire and combs and Cooper's tools. Cooper's make barrels. And these are all human-made tools. So there is a theme here. Here's a collection of fossils. So these are naturally found objects. And you can see that there's a lesson in natural history here as well in these write-ups. There's also another collection of Native American tools. These have been worked on, but natural materials, not synthetic or artificial. Here's some more of an art and functional characteristics. These are vases on the left and pottery, but they're also quite decorative. On the right, you can see various masks, including a big Garuda mask from Southeast Asia, used in ritual dances and bringing, it's an amulet. It wards off evil spirits. And here's two others, thematic. This is an exhibition of witches on the top left, and uranium glass on the bottom right, or the right-hand side, and explaining once again, educating the audience about what these are. So these are many types of collections, different types of collections, but some of them share some common motivations, and I'll go through a few of these, but hurriedly. There's the challenge, the thrill of the hunt, ever looking for new items, arranging our vacation perhaps and looking for others. There's a desire. There's always an enjoyable and renewable state of a good feeling discomfort, if you will, where you want to really have this thing and it almost hurts, but yet you can anticipate getting it and there's a sense of joy as well. It's a new type of luxury consumption. Because we're taking these things out of use, they're not necessities, they're luxuries. And we're committing to a life of luxury consumption when we commit to a collection. There's similarities to two types of love, erotic love and agapic love. And this sometimes creates family issues. For example, a collector is giving their love and time and money to the collection, and that love and time and money could otherwise be spent on family members. So the collection may be a bit like a sibling in the case of sibling rivalry, or a spouse in the case of infidelity, spending this time and effort and love on the collection rather than the spouse. We could also see a motive involving an avocation where we can succeed perhaps to a greater degree than in our vocation, a somewhat smaller number of competitors. We control a small part of our little world, the objects in the collection. We're ordering. This is a discipline of modernity. And so you can see the Barbie doll collection in a book I've written on collecting on the right, but arrayed according to the time, the clothing, and so forth. It's also a source of status, prestige, identity, our sense of who we are, a focus of scholarship, learning, and discovery, as you saw with most of the exhibitions in the museum exhibition that many of you are a part of, and conveying information as well as just here are some interesting objects. It's a form of materialism, but in a sense, it's also a form of anti-materialism. That is, we are going beyond just considerations, if we're a true collector, quote unquote, of just material gain and appreciation for material aspects. We're devoting our time and our money. It's almost like we're sacrificing for the sake of the collection, a greater good than we are. There's contagious magic here. If we get a music box once owned by Winston Churchill, we expect something of connecting with Winston in owning it and perhaps caressing it. There's sometimes seriality, and I'm playing here, but the motto, save the whales, could be followed by get the whole collection. Here's a serial collection of cards about whales, for example. Socializing with fellow collectors is another benefit. Is this addiction, obsession, compulsion? In a very few collectors. These are by far the exceptions rather than the rule. This is a normal behavior, not a psychotic behavior for most collectors, almost all. but there's a sense of mastery and connoisseurship that we develop in being a collector. There's also a feeling that it's mine, and because it's mine, it's really a representation of me, my extended self, if you will, in a term that I have used. And the collectors become, in effect, priests or priestesses, sacralizing ordinary objects by bringing them into the collection, appreciating them, ordering them, controlling them, and making them a part of themselves. So here's another quote from Jeanette Cooperman. Purists collect for posterity, to be able to have that unique, deep collection to a museum someday. Whoops. To collect is to rescue things, valuable things from oblivion, or simply from the ignoble destiny of being in someone else's collection rather than your own. And so we're seeing a sort of playing with destiny here, and this was actually Susan Sontag that was being quoted. Now, with digital possessions, we throw some differences in here, some curves. Digital collecting objects can be things like MP3 music files or films with MP4. It can be avatars, digital photographs, emails, anything that we might represent digitally, and that's more and more things these days that can become meaningful. And so the question is, does that mean that these things are collectible because we can give them meaning, because we can assemble them? You can see a diverse array of things here on the right, and we'll revisit some of these. But here are some types of digital possessions. We might have NFTs, non-fungible tokens. They could include avatars. This is supposedly an avatar of me on the top left, or baseball cards, which are now electronic. Digital art, like this Bored Ape Yachts Club ape, sort of valuable with the digital fur, sold at auction for about $3.5 million, even though it's one of a set of 10,000 computer-generated, algorithmically generated apes with different sorts of dress, hats, and so forth. We could also own digital land, digital houses, digital vehicles, and other sorts of digital collectibles. Actually, the Bored Ape would qualify as one of those. And various types of digital loot. We could also buy digital clothing and accessories for our avatar, and on an ongoing inventory of possible digital things. So here's a question. To what extent do our theories of collecting translate to this new category of consumption object? Are digital objects, in fact, collectible? Well, there's some challenges. For one thing, remember that definition that I gave you. They should be taken out of use. They should become sacred. Well, we also, with digital possessions, protect them, but that does not necessitate their non-utility or non-careful use, or careful use, I guess. So even prized digital collections remain in use by our participants. Digital music collections are listened to, collections of ebooks are read, treasured collections of cars are competed with in digital races, and so forth. So it doesn't seem it obeys quite all the rules of non-digital collecting. But if you compare it, digital consumption objects acquire a sort of non-rivalry in use. This is a term that economists use. If we have a collection of vinyl records, and they have some rare old records among them, other collectors would envy them. They would feel rivalrous toward them. On the other hand, every copy of a digital good is indistinguishable from the original. And so they're not rare. They're not sacred in that sense, or at least not inherently so. Watkins et al. In a study found that acquiring digital music lacks the thrill of the hunt, therefore. And so collecting vinyl records brings some of that back, and maybe one reason that people are, at least many people, going back to vinyl. Now, digital abundance and the elusiveness of elusiveness. Remember that we should have things that are rare in order for them to become collectible. If everyone has them, if it's dirt under our feet, although I have met a dirt collector, that it becomes less than valuable for collecting. So what is done sometimes is to create artificial scarcity. And that could again cater to time aristocracy versus money aristocracy, that we might have things only available for a certain period of time, or we might have them available at random periods of time where we don't tell people. So this phonograph on the top here was a super rare item in Habbo Hotel, a Finnish online game. And here's a race car, which again is relatively rare because relatively few of them were offered on this digital platform. There's also evidence here. This is a thing that's in a digital world called Roblox. And this particular site within it is called Gucci Garden. And they sell on the right-hand side a virtual Gucci Dionysus bag, which sold for over $4,000. Whereas the real Dionysus bag sold in Gucci stores for less than that, $1,000 less, or almost $1,000, at $3,400. So what goes here? Why has this digital object become so valuable, so much more valuable than the real object? Well, here's some people showing off their digital objects. Usually, you can only see them when someone goes online to the right place. But here's a man flexing, showing off. I sold my Lamborghini for this NFT, but I think Bored Ape Yachts Club is bigger flex. So excited to be a part of this community. So hashtag ape follow ape works, I've heard. And you can see on the right, someone has their Bored Ape on their wristwatch to be able to show to people. And so even though it would seem that you can't show your digital collection when you're offline, there are ways that have been found to get around that. So why pay so much for so little is another question. Now, not all digital objects are valuable, but obviously some of them are. Well, I think we get some hints from conceptual art and minimalism. Both of these overlap with non-functional tokens and with psychological ownership. Now, psychological ownership is the phenomenon of feeling you own something without legally owning it. But conceptual art, as we'll look at in a minute, has no possibility of legal ownership. It's only a concept. And NFTs have fractional property rights, as we'll look at in just a moment as well. What both of these, all three of these, share is that the idea is more important than the thing that it represents. It's the distilled essence of the thing to which you gain bragging rights if you own the digital object. And so here's a piece of conceptual art, actually landscape art is a subgenre within it, in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And this is by Robert Smithson. He did it in 1972. And it cost about $6,000. He spent 6 days having dump trucks. He dumped this in the Great Salt Lake in a pattern that he had drawn out. And so what his idea was able to be executed by someone else, and that's perfectly all right. The idea is the important thing. So here's some other examples of ephemeral things. For $1,000, you can buy this I Am Rich online thing, which lights up and says, I am rich. That's all it does. Or you can have digital avatars. I've shown you mine. You can have digital collectibles. In the Middle Ages, you used to have faux banquets. And so one banquet course would be brought in, and it would be lavish, but it would be whisked away only to be replaced by a more lavish one, and on and on. So you couldn't get your fill, and you could continue to show off in front of your guests. You might also be familiar with the shredding of the $1.3 million Banksy on the right. It only went 3/4 of the way down, which Banksy said was an accident. Well, maybe, but this sold later for $6 million, so quite a bit of appreciation. There's also a collector called Burnt Banksy, and he bought a $95,000 Banksy and promptly lit it on fire, thereby, he said, turning it into a non-material, NRT is what I'm trying to say. So here's Max Harish. He's a German artist, and he sells pixels. Now, unlike the case with particles, they're not pixels from a particular painting or work. They're just pixels. And so he can sell you a red one or a green one or a blue one at different prices. And in fact, he's cheeky enough that he even sells an invisible one. And so at least you get a portrayal in the slide on the right, but the invisible one just shows up as totally black. Here's another example. And we get into things like artificial scarcity and numbered prints here. And Walter Benjamin, famous early 20th century intellectual, worried about the aura of the artist no longer attaching to mechanically reproduced things. Well, now we have digitally reproduced things that can be infinitely reproduced without losing their quality as well. Furthermore, we do still have contagious magic from the artist. Mauricio Casalan was in, once again, it's getting ahead of me, was in the Basel art show in Miami Beach 2 years ago. And in his gallery, he taped a banana, a real banana, to the wall. And he sold it for $120,000. And so he put up another one, got a new banana, sold that for $120,000. And so he went and got another banana, and this one he was going to sell for $150,000, but another artist came along and ate it. And this is a little bit like Damien Hirst, who sold one of the Saatchi brothers, pickled shark, great white shark, and it was in a tank. And then Saatchi sold it to another collector, and the pickled shark started to decay. And so Hirst said, well, I'll pickle another one for you. And he did. But then the question was that the real pickled shark? He also made another one with the same title for a museum in Mexico. So was that the real shark? And this is an old conundrum, philosophical conundrum called the Ship of Theseus. Theseus was a Greek king and a warrior, and his ship succeeded in battle. And so his followers decided they would put up his ship, a wooden ship, as a monument to him. But eventually the ship began to decay one plank at a time. And so one plank at a time, it was replaced with new planks. And so eventually the whole ship was replaced. And the question is that still the Ship of Theseus? And so this brings us to another collection. Do museums still need objects, or could we get by with digital facsimiles that people don't even have to, like you're doing today, some of you, come to the museum, you can watch it on Zoom and see the object. And now with the coming metaverse, you may be able to see it in 3 dimensions with a headset. So are we in a new era of collecting with digital objects? Again, Cooperman said, ownership is the most intimate relationship one can have with objects, remarked Walter Benjamin. Is this the definition of a fetish? I wonder. Will millennials' famous preference for experiences rather than possessions permanently alter the pursuit of objects collected? Well, a good question, I think, to pose. It may be that we get to have fluid collections, which is collecting without owning. This is a term that Flora Barty developed and actually borrowed from Zygmunt Bauman. But might digital collections better suit the needs of consumers who prefer a liquid lifestyle? Also, mobile technologies may enable many digital items to be carried around with you. And you can pull out your phone and say, here, look at my digital collection, and so show them your non-fungible tokens. And Watkins reflects, how might collecting take place where ownership is partial or absent entirely, as is often the case for digital objects? And when you buy an NFT, anyone else can see that image, and you only get the image, as we'll look at in a minute, when you buy the NFT. Now, here's a collection where you can access it but not own it. And this is streaming music or streaming video in the case of Netflix. And this is a playlist. And so what you can show other people is, this is my playlist. And they can perhaps go online and see your playlist as well. You know, we used to make digital tapes for people. And then I suppose we made digital CDs and DVDs. And now we can just show them give them a playlist, I suppose, with connections to our streaming music. So welcome to the world of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Down on the lower left, you can see the first 5,000 days, which is a collage of one work of art, digital work of art, like those in the rest of the panel here, every day for 5,000 days by the artist who called himself Beeple, or Mike Winkelmann, he sold it for $69.3 million to a man whose code name was Metakovan. Actually, Vignesh Sundaresan, who lives, Indian, who lives in Singapore. And so he said, I would have even paid more. I want to show that Indians can also engage in, and he was a Bitcoin millionaire. Indians can also engage in high-tech spending and outlandish spending. So this is not exactly great art, but nevertheless, it is art. And it woke people up to the fact that there may be something to digital possessions and collecting them. So just to make the distinctions here, we have fungible and non-fungible things, tangible and intangible things. And so fungible things would include money, that is fiat money and gold, also the various cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin in the upper left. Whereas non-fungible things could include both the physical, paintings, houses, cars, and the virtual. You can see here some of the digital collectibles just going around the clock here. This is a CryptoPunk. This is NBA Top Shots, where you get a video of famous basketball plays. This is a digital sneaker by Nike. This is Louis Vuitton's doll-like object, and this is something called CryptoKitties that I'll talk about more in a moment. So what we're really interested in here is those things in the lower right as digital collectibles. And you might buy them with cryptocurrency. And so this is a delightful book if you haven't run into it, The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince. And he lands on a planet with a businessman. And the little prince asks more, how can someone own the stars? To whom do they belong? Replied the businessman grumpily. I don't know, to nobody? Well, then they belong to me because I thought of it first. And that's all it takes. When you're the first person to have an idea, you patent it and it's yours. Now I own the stars since no one before me has ever thought of owning them. Well, it's not quite that ludicrous to make an artwork into an NFT, but as we'll see, it does something special. We could also collect things that are ever changing, like our YouTube collection or our Spotify collection or our Netflix collection. And again, these could become collectibles. We could also put up online both our digital objects and potentially our real world objects as well. And so here on Goodreads, their slogan is imagine it as a large library that you can wander through and see everyone else's bookshelves, their reviews and their ratings. And so this was someone's bookshelf. We can also see collections of real things put up online, and these are also narrated. And so you can see at the bottom, here you can see we have my English Harry Potter books. Here we have a lot of my Dutch childhood books. Here we have a lot of books with black covers, so organizing them as we might stamps by the color. And you can see the train objects on the right-hand side here. So we can display and narrate our collections online, and other people who are collecting similar things can compete and can be enthused by seeing our objects. So conclusions so far. First of all, digital collections lack certain elements of material collections, including the quest, the aura, and the provenance, or the record of ownership. Although with the blockchain guaranteeing non-fungible tokens, you can look back and see who's owned this previously and pay more for something owned by Paris Hilton, for example. At least some people would. And second quote is saying, however, as with orchestrated material collections, digital items may be manipulated so they can better facilitate collecting practices, reassembled as rivalrous, scarce, and elusive. Yet, should digital collections seek to mirror digital collections, or is it something entirely new? Well, as you know, you can alphabetize your digital collections of music or whatever it might be. You can arrange them in genres in other sorts of ways by how much you prefer them and so forth. And the bottom quote, it's actually just a bullet point of mine. Digital consumption objects open up avenues for new types of collections and collecting that prompt a reconsideration of the theoretical boundaries of that which we call collecting. And so here are some types of NFTs. Here are the NBA Top Shots that I mentioned. To the right of that is two digital paintings by Josephine Bellini called Choose Number 4 and Choose Number 5. And that number 4 and number 5 is the only way in which they differ. But as we'll see in a minute, these are copies. They're not the original. The lower left has a CryptoKitty, and these are unique because you can breed your CryptoKitties with other people's CryptoKitties, and they come up in different colors and orientations, and they become more valuable and saleable in doing that. And this is the $3.4 million Bored Ape Yachts Club ape that I showed earlier. But the kicker is 95% of all NFTs, which were such a rage in 2020, 2021 during COVID, are now worth zero. And so a lot of people invested heavily in these things, and now it's very hard to get your money out of them. Doesn't mean that the market has disappeared, but it certainly collapsed. So what do you get when you buy an NFT? Well, you get an ownership of an image that is just a digital image of a basketball play, etc. You don't get the real thing. And you can't put it on a t-shirt and sell it unless you happen to be granted intellectual property rights, as happens in some digital artworks. You don't own the original, so you can't benefit if it increases in value. And your ownership is theoretically not tied to the platform, like Sandbox is a virtual world. Artist resale rights may solve an argument, really, between Robert Rauschenberg and Robert Scull at the sale of Scull's collection in 1972. Rauschenberg is an artist, and he came up to him and said, I sold you this work, this painting, for $4,000, and now you've sold it for $84,000, and I don't get anything out of that. Well, with NFTs, you can specify that the artist gets a percentage of any future sale. 10% would be common. And so this is a way for artists to hang on to some of the value of their work. And not have collectors gain all of the value. Now, I'm just going to make a couple more points, and then I think I'll zoom to the end so we have some time for questions. That we have something called psychological ownership. If you do as I have students in a class that you don't assign seats to, and they always tend to sit in the same seat, and someone else is in their seat someday, they might, in fact, even say to them, hey, you're sitting in my seat. Now, this is not because you legally own that seat, but you feel a sense of psychological ownership. Well, I am introducing a concept that I'm calling, along with Rahul Seth, a co-author, psychological possession. And it's taking advantage of a quote by a conceptual artist, Lawrence Weiner. He said, once you know about a work of mine, you own it. There's no way I can climb inside your head and remove it. Or suppose you listen to a piece of music, or you catch it on the radio or on your Spotify list, and it sort of sticks in your head. There's an earworm. You're humming it all day. Once it's inside your head, you haven't paid for it. You don't own it. Even psychologically, you don't own it, but you do possess it psychologically. You can sing it to someone else if you learn it well enough. So some of the effects of having property rights, but with NFTs, you probably have diminished attachment, diminished legal property rights, diminished psychological ownership, but perhaps no effect on psychological possession, because in this case, you can't help it. Once you know the idea, you have it. Now, there's actually more to this presentation, and I'll put it up online, and you can email me or perhaps go through the museum. I'll put it up on Dropbox, I think. And you can see it and also email me further questions that you have. But let me stop there. And as I said, zip to the end in the interest of time. And so I would conclude by saying thank you. And I'll be glad to field any questions that you might have. So let me, if I can find the right button here, stop sharing. Whoops, almost. Maybe one of my co-hosts can stop sharing here because I'm not finding the button.
You're no longer sharing. You're good. All we see is your face.
Okay. Lovely. Well, as I said, I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. And right now, looking at chat, I see a couple. The first one is by Ria Wawani. I hope I Wadwani. And she asks, how do collectors extend themselves through digital possessions? Also, if they do, does this extension fade away with time? Or in other words, does time play a role in explaining the extension of self in digital versus physical possessions? That's a very good question, because we were just talking about psychological possession. If you hear this piece of music and if it's sort of ringing in your ears all day, you possess it as long as you remember it, but without rehearsal, it's probably going to fade over time. Whereas a physical object, it's not going to fade over time. It's always going to be there up on your shelf to remind you. And so memory is important here. Repetition is important, and sort of resacralization, taking the thing down and dusting it, using it perhaps sometimes on a special occasion, bringing out those collectible salt and pepper shakers, bringing the Christmas ones down that you got from Aunt Ida, and using them and so forth, may help to renew them. So what about you also bring in the extended self here? I think the same goes for the extended self. As long as you remember these things, you they're a part of you. You could recall some of them. With 800 publications, I can't recall the titles of all my publications any longer. Getting old may have something to do with that too. And so they've sort of left my extended self. I could revive them perhaps by looking back at my CV and trying to remember them, or actually hauling it out if I still have a copy, and refreshing my memory. But those parts of my extended self have gone away. Fortunately, my daughter, who's here in the virtual audience, has not for a moment gone away from my memory. And so there's some things that we hold on to a bit tighter, even though they're thousands of miles away, rather than physically with us. So I hope that was answering that question. Irene Luleft asks, how have people responded to digital images of museum collections? Could they really take the place of material objects? Or is the experience just too different? Well, I think the museum curators here might answer this better than I, but I think that it's not the same, that it's almost, but not quite the same in some instances. There's a piece of moon rock that is rock from the moon in the Smithsonian, and people can touch it. They try to kiss it. They weep in front of it. It really moves them because it's the real thing. Now, I suppose if the museum wanted to save it and put in a facsimile and didn't tell anyone, people would still have the same emotional reactions. But that would be cheating, and we think that museums don't cheat. In fact, just the opposite that happens. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts used to have casts of a number of famous sculptures, rather. And as they began to get more elite and more elite patrons, they sort of put them downstairs as an embarrassment and had only quote unquote authentic art for people to see. So I personally don't think that they will ever replace material objects. On the other hand, museums are, art museums, for example, increasingly collecting art that is entirely digital. And how do you show that in a concrete fashion? There is no concrete counterpart of it. It was created digital, and it continues on in digital format. So you can show it on a big screen like the one some of you are watching this on in the museum today. But you can't physically touch the objects that I've shown you. And they I would hope, still be a part of your psychological possessions, because you know about them now. And the same with the words that I'm saying and the contentions that I've made. But it's not the same as being able to see the real objects and talk to me face to face. I would hope that's a little different at any rate. So yeah, I still have faith that museums still do need objects, contrary to, well, actually consistent with the conclusion that Steve Kahn came to in the book called Do Museums Still Need Objects? And Marilyn Murphy asks, what level of information should be kept on collection items for possible donation, future sale, or left in wills? Well, I guess, first of all, collectors would oftentimes love to have museums buy their collections wholesale, or they would even give them to them. But that's difficult, especially with a contract that says they will never change them, they will always display them as a collection, they will keep them on display, and so forth. That's really handcuffing the museum. But the museum, nevertheless, does try to be faithful to the donor's wishes as much as possible. They also can deaccession things sometimes, that is, put them up for sale. And that's necessary sometimes as well to keep the collection current and to build upon its strengths and so forth. I guess I should have mentioned that I did mention that there can be sibling rivalry or jealousy with a spouse with collections sometimes. Sometimes in order to find an heir in the family, collectors have to skip a generation, go to the grandchildren because they didn't have this rivalry with the possession, and they sort of don't have that anxious attitude toward the collection. So yeah, I think there should be an amount of information that's kept, and museums certainly keep good records where it was found. This is something that collectors of found objects don't often do. They don't put down where they got a fossil, or where it was located, or who had owned it previously. And that's also handicapping the museum and also archaeologists, because they would like to know those things. And next, Ricardo Amaral Filho says he has two questions. First, isn't organizing a fundamental function of collecting that extends even more importantly to digital collections? Well, you're absolutely right that we're making sense of things and displaying them in a way that makes sense. Uh, at a very rudimentary level, somebody might organize their stamps by color, but eventually we learn there's probably better ways to organize them thematically or chronographically. And so the way that a collector organizes is really a creative act itself, bringing things together that perhaps other people haven't thought of going together, but nevertheless they do. And of course, museums do that as well. And so that is both more important digitally, and also perhaps easier digitally, because you can move things around, you can order them instantly in a particular way, and it may be easier as well as perhaps more fun to play around with different playlists, for example, of your music. And secondly, he asks, how about fragmentation of collections themselves? In the past, you would be a philatelist, uh, a stamp collector, that is, but now people tend to collect more randomly, and created for collecting on purpose. You're right that many of the NFT, as I said, there were 10,000 of the Bored Ape Yachts Club apes, for example, are meant to be a part of a collection, although you have to be fairly wealthy in that case to afford that particular collection. And tending to collect new things in random or different sorts of ways. So NFTs from different collections entering a collection. And I didn't really get to it, but millennials, those born between 1981 and 1995, tend to get into things like NFTs, not for collecting per se, but for investment, or better put, for speculation. And because you have to buy these things with the cryptocurrencies, you have the cryptocurrency volatility multiplied by the volatility of the NFTs, and that volatility is an attraction. It's anecdotal, but I rode in an Uber in Denver to the airport, and my driver had a 9 to 5, 5-day-a-week job, but on weekends he drove an Uber, and he put all of his money into Bitcoin. And he had just lost almost all of his money, something like 80% of it. But he was putting all of his new money in Bitcoin. He was doubling down. And he was actually wise, because Bitcoin has exceeded the levels that it was at in 1922, thanks to a number of factors right now. And it's quite expensive, something like 60 to 80 to almost $100,000 at one point recently, from $20,000 just a year or two ago. And so, yes, people collect for different sorts of reasons, but in this case, these people were investing rather than, I would say, true collectors. They could lock it away in a vault. They don't need to see it. They're simply interested in the worth of the thing rather than the thing itself. So fragmentation is in fact a fact of life, and so it's therefore maybe more of a challenge to do digital collecting and to make sense of it and to create your own personal touch in organizing it. So one further question here by several more. Nada Alaha of Maynooth University. Possessions extend their collectors' selves, but some collections just being a financial asset, would this be more how collectors are perceived by others? For example, being rich. Yeah, that's a very good point. And some of the rich collectors, I mentioned Paris Hilton and Jimmy Kimball, touted their Bored Ape Yachts Club apes on television, drove up the value, and then got rid of them. This is called a pump and dump scheme in stock market terms, but it's not yet been made illegal with NFTs. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission is just beginning to turn their attention to these things. Collectors who also sell, and this is something that people do because they want to stay in the collecting industry area. So they start a shop selling stamps or whatever it might be, are looked at somewhat askance by collectors because they say, well, you just sell your things. You're not attached to them. You don't love them the way that we do. Actually, dealers who do have personal collections tend to keep them entirely separate from the collection, and they do follow that do not sell rule. But yes, I think poorer collectors who usually wind up less well off, not having their things appreciate, do resent rich collectors sometimes and envy their collections as well. Pamela Denny asks, are experiential collections, I have been there, done that, etc., considered to be on the collecting spectrum. I like that idea of the collecting spectrum. But yes, I think they can be. I met a woman one time who collected planes she had seen and places that they have been. Many people will tweet about their vacation. And in fact, photographs, which once used to be kept in albums that were collections and labeled and so forth, have now become ways of instantly communicating and perhaps evoking envy by saying, I have been here and done this. We're making others who are not here and not doing this envious. But yes, I think we can certainly collect, and this is consistent with my notion or our notion of psychological possessions, that these can be collections of experiences or other intangible things. And so I think that's very much a part of it. Once you know the idea, it's yours. We can't go into your head and remove it. And so experiential collections can be displayed sometimes on your smartphone, sometimes in other ways like in digital museums. Hyan Hu asks, what aspects of the motivation have changed comparing the collection of NFTs to a collection of material stuff? Well, I touched a little bit on this, but you can not touch these things, and so you can't caress your NFTs the way that you can caress a collection of teddy bears, for example. You can't put it up so that anyone who walks in your house will automatically see it and ask about it, perhaps. You can't appreciate it in the way that I guess I would say is tangible, at least so far. Although maybe in the future we will be able to. We can't touch digital things in the metaverse, but with haptic gloves, we may be able to do that in the future. And in fact, I bought an Apple Vision Pro, and it has such realistic 3D that a butterfly will come out and land on your hand. I was showing it to some master students who were using it for a class project. And one of them, large man, there was a scene where a dinosaur breaks the frame and comes out and starts sniffing at you and follows you around as you move. And he tore off the headset, screamed, and ran out of the room. It was that realistic. So perhaps we don't lose total touch with these digital representations, as we'll see in the future. Finally, I think last question by Lorena Garcia Ramon. Can psychological possession play a role in facilitating communal identity? For example, I can imagine creating bonds with others who share things, might possess psychologically like historical narratives. Yes, I think that's very much true, that collectors tend to specialize in an era, a period, a type of object, and they get together sometimes in collectors' exhibitions. We have comic books exhibitions, convocations each year. And those are things where you meet fellow collectors, you begin to bond with them, and you have that common interest. And it's like everyone is a brother or a sister here because we all believe we all love the same things. And so I've perhaps gone over a little bit, but I hope I haven't gone too much over. And I don't know if there are any questions from live participants there that they would like to ask and be fielded by the curators.
Okay.
Oh, what do you personally collect? Sophie asks. Well, I did as a child collect rocks and minerals and fossils, but I don't actively do that anymore. And I would say a collector who's no longer actively acquiring things is a curator rather than just a collector. But I do collect interviews with collectors and others for different other projects. And so when collectors ask me that, I say, I collect all of you. I collect interviews with collectors and learn what's valuable and important to you. And I do consider that as an experience. So Mary said, thank you, and thank you for having me here. I've enjoyed this.
Dr. Bell, just one more question. You say you collect interviews with collectors. What are some of the most unusual collections that you've come across?
Well, I'd mentioned that I ran into someone who collected dirt, and I was rather quizzical at first, but she explained, well, don't you see, this is dirt from Israel, and this is dirt from Mississippi, and this is dirt from Thailand. And so she had a reason that these objects were collectible, but it would be difficult to exhibit this without detailed explanation, I suppose, for other collectors. I think I found that one unusual. I interviewed a man who collected the corks from wine bottles that he used in seductions in his life. And so they brought back a set of memories to him. And that was a somewhat unusual collection. There are lots and lots of them. A man who collected racehorses, horticultural objects, any number of things. It goes on and on. There's almost nothing that you can think of that hasn't been collected by someone, including these days various digital objects. And so it's really diverse, and it's a wide open field and opening wider all the time.
Well, Dr. Bell, I will not ask you how many corks that gentleman had.
Quite a few.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Well, Dr. Bell, thank you so much for this. This was absolutely fabulous. You said that you were going to provide your email address in case somebody had some additional questions.
Yes, let me see if I can, let's see, how do I do this to everyone?
Put it in the chat.
Yeah, but I've got a chat going with my daughter. I want to go beyond her and talk to everyone. Well, let me just say it because it's relatively short. Oops, I've hit the wrong button. It's rbelk, RBELK, at yorku, yorku.ca. So I'll do that one more time. It's RBELK at yorku.ca. So hopefully you got that.
We will be sending a follow-up email to everyone as well. So if you're okay with that, Dr. Buck, we'll include it in that email.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. And so this is the end of collecting and collections by Dr. Belk. Again, cannot thank you enough for the fascinating talk. And thank you to all my registrants.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Oh, and
Thank
one
you.
last question I saw pop up in the chat. There will be a recording, and that I will include the link as well in the follow-up email. That'll take about a week.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Buck.
Thank
Bye.
you.